Welcome to the Hollywood Scholar. I'm Jed Morgan, and I definitely seem to be in the minority when it comes to the HBO Max adaptation of The Last of Us, thinking it's less than okay, but not bad by any stretch of the imagination. I seem to be one of the only people who has that negative an approach to the series, mainly because of the writing and the acting involved, whereas the production value is incredible. But I've already said my piece in my review for the first episode of The Last of Us. If you want to check that up, it'll be linked above. But The Last of Us is very early on in its steps. One episode done doesn't mean the series is going to be good, especially with it leading to The Last of Us Part 2. So even if I'm in the minority, I still do believe by the end of the series, a lot of other people will come to realize that there wasn't a whole lot of point to that first episode being good whatsoever. But regardless, I'm going to take a brief break from talking about the content of episode 1 and talk about the virtue signaling done by the creators outside of the production of the first episode and just the normal Hollywood BS that we've come to know and love and expect from these people trying to virtue signal about how their show, their product is actually a message for something so important that the actual product doesn't matter in and of itself. It's just how much it can preach to you about whatever said issue is on the forefront of these activist mentalities. And even some of this activism is coming from a very disappointing source. But let's jump into it. We have this article here from the Salon, and I've covered them before. They're a little bit, completely insane, but this article is really quite a next level for them because they said The Last of Us is an almost perfect metaphor for climate change, but it gets one thing wrong. Now, there was that brief mention about climate change at the beginning of The Last of Us episode 1 when it was back in the 60s, saying if the temperature rose, the cordyceps could evolve to infect humans. It was a passing comment, not really that big of a deal to me. I noticed it, but it didn't affect my enjoyment of the episode. But they're using this to spin it out into a whole message about climate change, as well as including actual interviews from the creators involved, Neil Druckmann, the guy from Chernobyl, and that's the one that's really disappointing to me is the guy from Chernobyl is participating in this pandering, and the Salon is really weaponizing this into this very, very long article that is full of nihilism, full of preachiness, and is just self-congratulatory about figuring out the secret message of Last of Us that we're all too dumb to understand, and that's why the Earth is dying, because we're too dumb to understand how essential The Last of Us is to our culture and to saving the world, in fact. But let's jump right into it. Climate change could trigger humanity's end, much like in the HBO No drama series, but it wouldn't happen suddenly. So they are still critiquing it, so I do have to give them that. But throughout all this, it's just very, very negative about this describing the science, or at least their belief science of it. But these are the comments made by the Chernobyl creator, Craig Mazin, who said, I think the thread underneath The Last of Us is you don't want to be too successful on planet Earth. What does that mean? You don't want to be too good? You don't want the society to be too advanced? He added, I'm not like anti progress, back to the Stone Age guy, but we must regulate ourselves or something will come along and regulate against our will. This is not something that I want to hear from an entertainer, a creator. This is not the right thing to market your show off of or even talk about in relation to your show because you know you're going to piss a lot of people off and put off a large, substantial part of your fan base who just wants to escape. A zombie flick and a zombie show is not exactly a highbrow piece of entertainment meant to educate you on world issues. It can do relationships like the original Last of Us did and emotional stuff that is timeless, and that first game did it incredibly well. But talking about how The Last of Us, how the zombie apocalypse is somehow Mother Earth's reaction to us being too good as a species is entirely a ridiculous standpoint and not what we want to hear. It's just cheap virtue signaling to act like your product is some self-aggrandizing message and save the world and is actually way more important than it actually is. It's very disappointing to hear it come from him, and I'm just really, really not surprised coming out of Hollywood in this day and age that they try to weaponize everything, even something that people like. As much as I don't like The Last of Us, a lot of people are, and this is going to turn a lot of them off, so they can't even get a good thing right. They have to destroy everything good in the world that fans like. They just can't help themselves, and this is only doing that. This is going to turn off a lot of people that were interested in The Last of Us. Rightfully so or not, virtue signaling is actually, in this day and age, a legitimate reason to stop engaging with the product, even if that virtue signaling isn't involved in the product, because death of an author is a complicated subject and hard to apply in practice in our current technological social media age. This is not something I want to think about when I'm watching The Last of Us. It's just very incredibly disappointing. But going on a lot more, the nihilism, the science of it. And they said The Last of Us is relevant because many pandemics can be directly tied to climate change. So it actually goes into how the, past pandemic that I can't say the real word of, the beer bug, is a direct result of climate change as well. So The Last of Us is not only a critique on climate change, but a critique on the world's reaction to the beer bug. It can be tied directly to climate change, but again, it's not easy connection for the general public to make. So this is just a snippet of it, but the article makes the argument that The Last of Us is meant to be palatable for the general public so they can realize what they did wrong during the beer bug and how that they can just gently ease them into how they should look at climate change, as if it's some sort of psyop to convince the public that they're wrong, that they need to do these things in this way. That is too extreme, even for, I'm guessing, Craig Mazin. I definitely don't believe that was his intention for the product. But the salon is, of course, going to spin it into some grand scheme to save the world. And it's quite bonkers, quite bonkers. And they go on to add, the world we know won't disappear in an instant. It would be gradual, pathetic limp towards oblivion. And that was their main piece of critique for The Last of Us, is in The Last of Us, the end of the world happened in a single night and it was all over and there was nothing that they could do. They're saying it's gradual. But then they add on this great piece of nihilism. In fact, the world we know is already gone. So it's already too late. So what's the point of the show to re-educate us if it's already too late? If it's already too late, there's no point. And then it just keeps going on about more nihilism, how The Last of Us is a great piece of literature that's going to save the world and teach us all how wrong we've been about climate change, about pandemics. And it's just quite a impressive piece of insanity that has been put out by the Salon. If you want the full article, definitely go check it out. It is a fun read without the, scientific gobbledygook that they add in that actually doesn't mean anything. If you know anything about science, it doesn't actually mean anything. It just makes them sound impressive and them sound cool. So if you're interested in laughing at some stupidity today, definitely go check out this article. But I do have a couple other side pieces of news that I wanted to briefly touch on that affect a lot of people's enjoyment of The Last of Us. And the primary piece of it is connections to The Last of Us Part 2. And that's really what I'm going to cover here. No matter how good Season 1 is, unless some people are able to take Season 1 and ignore the rest of the show, similar to how Westworld Season 1 can be divorced from the rest of the series, which turned into garbage, this isn't going to be a great interaction for fans, because if it leads to Part 2 like they've said it will, that is a problem. Fans despise Last of Us Part 2 because of how it changed the characters, how it affected the story, how it destroyed and desecrated Joel, and even did what it did to Ellie's character, destroyed her as well. And then, of course, you can't forget how it tried to make you sympathize with Abby, who was just a horrible, horrible human being. We don't want any Last of Us Part 2 in it, but it seems like they're integrating Part 2 into Part 1 to make it set up better for Season 2, and that is something that will immediately turn off many of the people who are enjoying Season 1 so far. Again, I'm not enjoying it really at all, but there are a ton of people who are. The majority of people who have watched it are enjoying it. And adding in Part 2 is only going to destroy that enjoyment for the many, many people who are watching as fans of the games previously. We have this article here from the Inverse that comes from an interview with several people that describe how they changed part of episode 1 and part of the series entirely to set up Part 2. Because in Part 2, Tommy's character is quite a bigger involvement in the story. Part 1, he's only really in the middle section for a little bit, and in the prologue, of course. He's really not that integral of a character, but they're saying that they changed it in Season 1 to set it up for Season 2, his involvement in Season 2. And that was one of the big changes that I wasn't really on board with, is how Joel was doing all he was doing right after the 20-year time jump to get back to Tommy. There was no years of separation between them where a lot of animosity had built up. There's none of that. So their cathartic reunion is going to mean a whole lot less once we get to Montana and Wyoming, when we get to that portion of the story. And this is saying that they did that to foreshadow the sequel. And that is a problem. It's very minor in episode 1. They talk about the only thing they really added was adding him into that breakfast scene at the beginning. That's really not that bad of an addition, to be honest with you. But it's merely one example of what they said is they're increasing his character to set up Part 2. Any setup for Part 2 is a major, major issue. According to CBR, the show did it better. The show is better than the video game, and that's not something you want to hear with something as incredible as the video game was. And they're saying that Joel being motivated to go find Tommy is actually superior, even though, like I said, you won't get that cathartic reunion after years of animosity between the brothers. It means so much less if it's just like, oh yeah, I haven't heard from you for like 3 weeks. You doing all right? Yeah, I'm doing fine. that's nowhere near as emotionally fulfilling as brothers who haven't seen each other for perhaps over a decade, who reunite and realize that their love is still there. It's a whole lot less valuable, but according to them, it makes the Joel and Ellie relationship better, which doesn't make any sense to me. And they don't really provide an argument. They literally just describe the events of the episode and say, yeah, that's better, without an argument, which is, to be fair, nothing unusual from CBR, but that's kind of intertwined with the Tommy changes, is they're thinking that those Tommy changes are good. The Tommy changes that'll eventually lead to part 2, which I definitely disagree with. And apparently there's a little bit of scandal going on from the video game director. He wants to unionize after being snubbed from the HBO credits. Apparently he's not getting paid his royalties from it. He's not really involved in this production at all, but as a creator, he should still at least get credit for it. I don't know the details of his contract, if that is right, but if he was legitimately getting snubbed, if Bruce Straley was legitimately getting snubbed, that is kind of a shitty thing to do, in my opinion. But it's not all that uncommon in Hollywood, unfortunately. After Lucasfilm refusing to pay their EU writers royalties after the transition over to Disney from the previous Lucasfilm regime, it's really just a disappointing trend that we see in Hollywood, is people aren't given their due, and that's very much the business side of things that is not surprising to me whatsoever, but it's an interesting piece of news that I did want to highlight. And lastly, in culmination of all this, apparently there is rumored casting for Abby. Now, I don't talk about rumors all that often, or I try not to. If I do, it'll be at the end of a video like this, definitely not a dedicated video on rumors. But this rumor is just so much fun that I couldn't pass it up. Now, this rumor is not based on a whole lot of evidence besides the actress who they believe is cast as Abby in the end of season 1 being followed on social media by Neil Druckmann, and the fact that the actress believes she looks a lot like Abby. That's pretty much all the evidence that these Twitter users and the foundation of the rumors derive their evidence from. It's very, very shallow, but I needed to talk about it regardless. There is potential casting for Abby in season 1, not season 2. So we might get, the Golf Club Melon scene with Joel. Thanks, Perry Chan, for that great analogy, in season 1, because if indeed Abby is cast in season 1, that's pretty much the first thing she does is bash Joel's brains in. So we might get that a lot earlier than you would expect. But this is the actress who supposedly is playing Abby, and I can see the resemblance. I can see a resemblance. I can definitely see it. Now, she's not as roided out as Abby from the game is, and doesn't have as much testosterone as Abby from the game did, but it's an interesting comparison that I really hope is true, because that would just be gold. Kill off Joel early, ruin season 1 because they knew people were going to like it, and so they had to add in some part 2 to ruin it. So we have a lot of part 2 getting added in. Whether or not this rumor is true, they have confirmed that they are integrating part 2 into it, and then this climate change nonsense that even the creator is supporting to a certain extent. Not as far as Salon goes, but the creator is supporting it to a certain extent. And I'm just not looking forward to the future of Last of Us. I want it to be good. I want all this stuff to be good, but I'm not going to lie and say that I thought it was good. I just want to be honest more than anything else, and I feel like it would be just ingenuous from my perspective to call Last of Us episode 1 good. And in continuation with that, my evaluation of the future news and the future that we know is coming from this show doesn't look bright. So Last of Us episode 1 may be the best that we get from this entire series going forward. But anyway, that's all I have for today. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Anon.
Hey, yo, are you feeling what I'm doing up in here? Oh, I know you are. Do you miss all the good, compelling stories that we used to get back in Hollywood that they ain't putting down no more? Oh, I know you missing it. So check out my book series, Odyssey of a Phoenix, a mythological epic about philosophy, morality, and modern-day mental illness issues, baby. Book 1, Down in Flames. Book 2, Apocalypse Then. These are currently on sale. What are you waiting for? Get your hands on them. And we got Book 3, Kill the Dark, is coming down the pipeline. Just wait for all the good stuff that's dropping. You ain't gonna be disappointed, fam.